Compared to just a week ago, Kabul is starting to show some signs of normalcy. Regular domestic air travel has resumed, and Pakistan's main carrier says flights will restart next week. Even foreign dignitaries are arriving in the Afghan capital to meet with the country's new rulers. Qatar's foreign minister met with Afghanistan's acting prime minister in Kabul in a show of international legitimacy the Taliban is eager to replicate. But the streets of Kabul tell a different story. Reports of protests being crushed and the curtailing of many rights, especially for women, has some skeptical the Taliban cabinet will follow through on its promises. The UN also warns that 1 million Afghan children could perish if aid isn't brought in. Food shortages and a crumbling economy have left millions with few options other than to seek refuge elsewhere. So, will the Taliban cabinet be able to tackle these challenges? And what role will the international community play? And to discuss Afghanistan's future, joining me now from Karachi is Huma Baqai. She is an associate professor of social sciences and liberal arts at IBA Karachi. And from Washington, D.C., Omar Samat is a former Afghan ambassador. A warm welcome to you both. So, Huma, now that a new Afghan government under the Taliban has been formed, what's your take on that? And is this an inclusive government as the Taliban promised?
It's definitely not an inclusive government. It is hardcore Taliban, and that was a bit of a disappointment for a lot of people who were at least looking at a broad-based government that would at least have some women, if nothing else, for optics. That has not happened. But a lot of people who understand Afghanistan more intricately are also of the view that it's a caretaker setup, and right now the Taliban have to do a balancing act between what the international community is expecting of them and how do they appease their own cadres. So I think that is what they've done. The first cabinet has been announced, but the fact that they're open to bringing in women and making it broad-based is encouraging. And we also have to understand that the time that we're giving them to do this. Right now, what is most important is to bring order in Afghanistan and to have a reference point.
Yes.
And for that, you need some form of governmental structure there, and that has happened.
So, Omar, what does Hassan Akhtun's appointment to prime minister mean for Afghan politics moving forward, and why it is called the interim government? I mean, will the Taliban go for elections anytime soon?
I sort of agree that it is a disappointment. The expectations were that the Taliban, in their first initial announcement of a caretaker, not interim. I think interim is a different term. We don't yet know if there will be an interim government as such. But in terms of obviously being broad-based, representing different ethnic groups, gender representation, it is disappointing. It's a chance that I think the Taliban missed. They do still have the door open to some extent in terms of expanding the government, bringing some change, making it more professional, especially more professional, and bringing people who are experts in different fields, because the Afghan people need that at this moment of crisis.
Yes.
As far as Mullah Hassan, your question is concerned, I mean, he's just one person who has been appointed as head of the government. We don't know much about him. He goes back all the way to the early days of the Taliban. And the setup right now looks more hardline than what was expected. So within the next few weeks, again, because of all the pressures that have been brought by the Qatari foreign minister being in Kabul, by other Afghan politicians, we'll see if the Taliban are going to be a bit more flexible.
So, Huma, when do you think the new government will get an international recognition? Which country is most likely to act first, or they're waiting for, as you've just mentioned, for a more inclusive government?
All capitals are looking at Taliban sort of walking their talk and being more accommodative of the commitments they made in the Doha peace process. But having said this, I think there is a 360-degree agreement on the fact that everybody, all all the capitals, including Western capitals, even the United States itself, that an engagement with the Taliban there's no option there. That's a compulsion. I think they already have what I call de facto recognition. The de facto recognition is from China, from Qatar, from Islamabad, from Turkey, Iran, and perhaps even Russia. And the fact that all other capitals are ready to engage with the Taliban is also indicative of that. And having said this, I think the international community is and should be very conscious of the humanitarian crisis that is unfolding, and the money that is being committed
Yes.
in the UN conference that happened on Monday. I hope it comes through. But once again, they bypass the Taliban. They say they're going to do it through non-governmental organizations. I don't know if bypassing the Taliban government right now is a good strategy. It may be self-defeating and counterproductive.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres warns of up to 1 million Afghan children could die from starvation. As you've just mentioned, the international community pledged $1 billion aid in help. But we know that there's a critical food shortage and there's a collapsed economy, and millions really don't know where their next meal will come from. So, Omar, how dire is the humanitarian situation?
Oh, it's pretty dire. Everybody knows about it. It's very good news to hear that 1.2 billion more or less were pledged yesterday. That will go through non-government and UN agencies to Afghanistan and not through the Taliban, obviously, because that government or that setup has not been recognized yet. But at the same time, obviously, the Taliban will have some influence over how this is handled and managed. What is more important, I think, at this point also is to recognize the fact that the international community, through the World Bank, IMF, and countries have frozen Afghanistan's assets. So there's no liquidity, there's no access to capital and finances, which means that people are not getting paid, which means that people have no access to their accounts in the banks, which means that trade and business is stalled. And that is a huge problem. And the Taliban have a huge responsibility to address those issues. And one of those obviously has to do again with being with showing the world and proving that they are broad-based and that they have professionals working in the government instead of having old-timers run the show.
So, Huma, what do you make of the EU and the US approach towards this new government? Are they going to, as Omar just mentioned, are they going to use aid and frozen reserves as leverage to hold the Taliban stick to their promises in terms of basic human rights and the rule of law?
But they definitely want to do that. But a bigger question is, will this work? And United States is one of those countries that has imposed maximum amount of sanctions anywhere in the world. And all the research that is done on sanctions is that they do not hurt the ruling elite. So the sanctions are not going to hurt the Taliban, as is Taliban are an entity that survive on sustenance. It's going to hurt the people of Afghanistan. Every third person is going to experience hunger in Afghanistan if aid is not restored. Moreover, if you're looking at order in Afghanistan, then the institutional sort of sustainability is also dependent on the fact that funds should be released. And there's just one more point that I want to add, because a lot of unpalatable information is also coming out. We know about Ghani moving out with thousands of dollars that belong to the Afghan people, and now Saleh's. There was a huge amount of gold and dollars that was recovered from Saleh's residence, which is indicative of the fact that the money that US poured in never reached the people of Afghanistan, and once again taking up a strategy that is going to hurt the poor people of Afghanistan. I don't know how fair that is, because the humanitarian crisis there is real. It's unfolding there. There's actually hunger and starvation that sees the Afghans in the eye. So I personally think that right now, like you're engaging with the with the Taliban to get your people out, like you're engaging with the Taliban to make sure that Afghanistan does not become a hub of terrorism, you should also engage with the Taliban to make sure that a humanitarian crisis does not unfold there.
So, Omar, given all this, how will they keep the country and the economy afloat financially? I mean, for how long the government could survive on foreign loans and aid?
There's no foreign loan and there's no aid coming in. And I don't think that that will be forthcoming until and unless the Taliban show flexibility on different fronts. Having said we're all used to thinking that money only comes from the West. Money also comes from the East nowadays. And so maybe the Taliban have a calculus whereby they think that countries in the region, great powers in the region, such as China maybe, is going to be forthcoming. And China obviously is not ready yet, but has shown some kind of inclination to be of assistance or to contribute under certain conditions. At the same time, the Taliban, remember, also rely on revenues that are collected domestically from taxing the Afghan people and taxing illegal trade, even drug trade. In the past, that has happened. And the Taliban, I think, are going to also feel the pressure. It's not going to be just on the Afghan people who obviously are going to suffer if we do not find new solutions, but the Taliban themselves. They need to pay their fighters. They need to feed them,
Yes.
And they need to make sure that they spend money for their own activities. So they will feel the crunch as well. It's a question of making sure that there's a balance between the hurt the Afghan people feel and the opportunities that exist to come out of this crisis.
All right, Huma, Omar, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining us on Straight Talk.